I still remember the rain that night, cold, unforgiving, soaking through my clothes as I stood alone at the station. My son's hand, once warm in mine, now clung to another. His choice was final. My world shattered. But destiny had its own way of teaching regret. Welcome to the Untold Love. Here, we share stories of love, heartbreak, and healing. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts below. I was never the kind of woman who dreamed of riches, luxury, or even a life filled with grand celebrations. My world was simple, too simple, some would say. But after I lost my husband so early in our marriage, that simple world turned into a battlefield of survival. And in that battlefield, the only reason I kept fighting was my son. He was so small when it all happened. Barely able to speak, barely able to understand why his father never came back home. In his little eyes, I saw confusion, but in mine, I carried determination. I made myself a silent promise that night: I will never let this child feel unloved, unprotected, or alone. Days turned into months, months into years, and he became my everything. My mornings began with his smile, and my nights ended with his soft breathing as I stood at his door, watching him sleep. Every meal I cooked, every coin I saved, every prayer I whispered, it was all for him. He wasn't just my son, he was my purpose. I still remember walking him to school every morning, holding his tiny hand in mine. He would look up at me with innocent eyes and say, "Mama, don't ever leave me." And my heart would ache, because I knew he had already lost one parent. I swore he would never feel abandoned again. As he grew older, our bond only deepened. We laughed together over silly jokes, shared stories over late-night dinners, and dreamed of the future when he would make me proud. There were moments when I looked at him and thought, perhaps God took my husband away, but in return, he gave me a love so pure, so unconditional, that it kept me alive. I never remarried. People told me I should, that I was still young, that I needed a companion. But I always smiled and said, I already have one. My son is enough for me. At that time, I believed nothing could ever come between us. After all, love built on sacrifice, trust, and devotion was supposed to last forever, wasn't it? But little did I know, life had a way of testing even the strongest bonds. Time has a way of running faster than our hearts can keep up. One moment, he was the little boy clinging to my hand, and the next, he was a grown man, building a life of his own. I watched him blossom into someone strong, ambitious, and kind. I thought to myself, yes, I did it. I raised him well. It was during this time that she entered our lives. She was beautiful, so effortlessly graceful that heads turned when she walked into a room. But it wasn't just her beauty. It was the way she spoke, the charm in her laughter, and the way my son's eyes lit up when he looked at her. I remember the first time he introduced us. His voice carried a nervous excitement, almost like a boy again. "Mama, this is the woman I want you to meet." In that moment, my heart softened. I thought, perhaps this is the daughter I never had. I welcomed her with warmth, offering her tea, listening to her stories, and smiling as I watched my son gaze at her like she was his whole world. A small part of me even felt relief, maybe now, he would have someone who could love him as much as I did. But as days turned into weeks, I began to notice little things. Conversations that once belonged to us, now belonged to her. Our dinners, once filled with laughter, grew quieter. He spent more time away, his eyes always searching for his phone, waiting for her messages. I told myself it was normal. After all, when love blossoms, it consumes everything around it. And yet, somewhere inside, I felt a shadow creeping in. There were moments when she looked at me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. A flicker of something I couldn't name. Was it distance? Was it possession? I brushed it off, convincing myself it was only my imagination. But the truth was undeniable. Slowly, silently, my son was slipping away from me. I would sit by the window at night, waiting for him to come home, only to hear his laughter outside, laughter that no longer belonged to me. And in my chest, a quiet ache grew. I had once been his whole world. But now, someone else had become his universe. It began with small moments, so small that at first, I tried to ignore them. A sentence cut short, a glance exchanged, a silence. That lingered too long. My son, once so open with me, now carried secrets in his eyes. And those secrets, they were no longer mine to know. One evening, I prepared his favorite meal, spiced rice and curry, the dish he had loved since childhood. I waited, the table set, candles flickering softly. When he finally walked in, his face was tired, his phone still in his hand. I smiled. And said, "Sit, eat. I made this just for you." But before he could answer, her voice echoed from the phone. She laughed about something private, something I wasn't a part of. He excused himself, stepping outside to take the call. I sat there, staring at the untouched plates, the food growing cold, and my heart colder still. Later that night, I heard them arguing outside. Her voice sharp, accusing, twisting little things into weapons. And then, his voice, defending her, doubting me. She said I was too controlling, too involved, unable to let him live his life freely. My son, my own flesh and blood, stood in silence before finally whispering, "Maybe you're right." Those words pierced deeper than any blade. When he came inside, I asked softly, "Is that truly how you feel? That I'm controlling? That I'm in the way?" He avoided my eyes, choosing silence over comfort. Silence, that was the loudest answer of all. From that night onward, the air between us shifted. He grew cautious in his words, careful with his time, always trying to keep peace between me and her. But in doing so, he drifted further from me. I was no longer the safe place he ran to. Instead, I had become the problem he tried to solve. The wound was not in his words alone, it was in his choice. For the first time in my life, I felt unwanted in my own son's heart. And that night, as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, I realized something I had never wanted to admit: love, no matter how pure, can be questioned. And when it is, it leaves scars that never fade. It happened on an evening I will never forget. The house was quiet, but the silence felt heavy, as though it was waiting for a storm. I had tried, again and again, to hold the pieces of our bond together, smiling when I wanted to cry, stepping back when I longed to hold on. But no matter how much I tried, the distance only grew wider. That night, I found him and her sitting together in the living room. Their whispers stopped the moment I entered. I could feel the unspoken words hanging in the air, words meant for me but hidden behind their silence. I took a breath and said gently, "All I ask is respect. I am your mother. I have given my life to you. Is it too much to want a place in your heart?" Her eyes narrowed, and before I could say more, she spoke, her voice firm, cutting. "He's not a child anymore. He doesn't need you telling him what to do, watching his every move. He has me now." My heart froze. But what shattered me was not her words, it was his. He looked at me with tired eyes, eyes that once lit up when I entered a room. His voice was low but sharp enough to slice through every memory we had built together. "Mama, I choose her. You need to accept it, or you need to leave." For a moment, I could not breathe. My son, the boy who once clung to my sorry, who once begged me never to let go, was now asking me to step away. I wanted to scream, to remind him of every night I stayed awake when he was sick, of every sacrifice I made so he could stand tall today. But the words never left my lips. Instead, silence wrapped around me like a shroud. I went to my room, quietly folding the pieces of my life into a small bag. My hands trembled, but my face remained calm. When I stepped out, neither of them stopped me. Not a word, not a hand, not even a glance. The door closed behind me, and with it, the life I had known for so long. That night, I walked away. Not because I wanted to, but because he had already chosen to let me go. The days after I left felt like walking through an endless tunnel of silence. I had rented a small, dimly lit room at the edge of the city. The walls were bare, the nights colder than I had ever known. For years, my world had been filled with his laughter, his voice echoing through every corner of our home. But now, there was nothing. Just silence. I filled my days with small routines, cooking for one, working quietly, reading books I could barely focus on. Sometimes, I would sit by the window and write letters to him. Long letters, pouring out the love I still carried, the memories I cherished, and the pain I could not say aloud. But those letters never found their way to him. They remained folded, hidden in a drawer, soaked with tears. I told myself, he doesn't need them. He doesn't need me. Yet, every night, I prayed for him. Even after everything, my heart could never stop being a mother's heart. But somewhere else, life was not as perfect as he once imagined. At first, I heard nothing. And then whispers reached me, from neighbors, from distant relatives, that his new life was cracking. The woman he chose above me was not who he believed her to be. Arguments replaced laughter. Distrust poisoned their days. The love he once defended so fiercely began to unravel thread by thread. I imagined him sitting alone, head buried in his hands, realizing what he had given up. But I did not gloat, I did not curse. Because regret is its own punishment. One evening, as I walked home from work, I saw a mother holding her son's hand, laughing as they crossed the street. For a moment, my chest tightened. I remembered how my son once clung to me like that, how he once believed I was his whole world. And then, a single thought echoed in my mind, does he miss me too? I didn't know. And perhaps, I was too afraid to ask. But somewhere deep inside, I believed regret was already knocking at his door. And it was only a matter of time before it consumed him. Years passed like autumn leaves swept away by the wind. My hair had turned silver, my hands worn from work, but my heart still carried the weight of a son I had lost, not to death, but to choice. I had accepted my solitude, or at least I thought I had. Until one evening, when the past came knocking at my door. It was late, and the sky was painted in shades of dusk when I heard a hesitant knock. I opened the door, and there he was, my son. But he was no longer the man who once stood tall and proud. His shoulders were heavy, his eyes red with exhaustion. His face carved with regret. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just stood there, the silence trembling between us. Then, with a voice that cracked like broken glass, he whispered, "Mama. I was wrong." Tears filled my eyes, but I held them back. He stepped closer, falling to his knees like the little boy he once was, clutching my hands as if afraid I would disappear again. His words poured out, confessions of betrayal, of how the woman he chose had shattered his trust, how he realized too late that no love could ever replace a mother's. "I should have listened to you," he cried. "I should have protected us. But instead, I hurt you. I hurt the only person who ever truly loved me." My heart broke all over again, not because of his mistakes, but because I could see the little boy inside him, lost and desperate, searching for the warmth he had thrown away. I lifted his chin, meeting his tearful eyes. And softly, I said, "My son. I forgive you." In that moment, years of pain melted into a quiet embrace. But forgiveness did not erase the past. The scars remained, the years we lost could never return. Still, there was peace in knowing that he had finally understood. Love, I realized, doesn't disappear. It bends, it bleeds, it breaks, but somehow, it survives. And as I held him close, I whispered to myself, perhaps this is enough. The days that followed his return were quiet, almost painfully so. We didn't rush back into the life we once shared, and neither of us expected to. Years had passed. And time leaves marks that neither love nor forgiveness can erase. But there was something gentle now, a soft understanding that even broken hearts can still find a rhythm together. He would visit often, sometimes bringing small gifts, sometimes simply sitting beside me, holding my hands without saying a word. And I began to see glimpses of the boy I had once tucked into bed, the young man who had laughed at my silly jokes, who had once clung to me in the rain. That boy hadn't disappeared entirely, he had just been lost, and now, finally, he was finding his way home. We spoke of the past carefully, like walking on thin ice. I listened as he recounted his regrets, his mistakes, the pain of realizing he had chosen wrongly. I shared my own fears, the loneliness that had weighed on me for years, the nights I cried quietly for the son who had drifted away. We did not dwell in blame. There was only honesty, raw and tender, and in that honesty, something miraculous began to heal. Life did not magically return to how it had been. There were awkward silences, old habits we could not unlearn, and moments when the past whispered sharply at the edges of our hearts. But there was also laughter again, gentle smiles, the comfort of familiar warmth. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset from the balcony, he reached for my hand. "Mama," he said softly, "I will never take you for granted again." And for the first time in years, I believed him. We had lost time, yes, but we had not lost each other entirely. Love had survived, battered and bruised, but alive. And perhaps that was all that mattered, the knowledge that no matter how far life tried to pull us apart, some bonds are unbreakable. I realized then that letting him grow, letting him make his mistakes, even letting him leave, it had been my ultimate act of love. Because sometimes, to protect what you love most, you must step back, even if it hurts more than anything in the world. And in that quiet evening, with the sun painting gold across our faces, I finally understood, regret may follow us, but love endures.